In 2012, Dayton, Ohio seemed like any other peaceful town. Families were busy with their routines, and life moved along without much drama. But for the Grayson family, everything was about to change in a way no one could have imagined. Daniel Grayson, a local firefighter admired by many, seemed to have a perfect life, his wife Emily, their two kids, Ellie and Luke, and a quiet home in a close-knit neighborhood. But behind closed doors, things were far from perfect. A decision Daniel made that year would shatter the trust in his family and set off a chain of events that ended in tragedy. It wasn't just a story about a broken promise or a mistake. It was the beginning of a series of choices and actions that would pull everyone around him into a nightmare they couldn't escape. This isn't just another family drama. It's a story of betrayal and obsession that grew out of control. To understand what went wrong, let's look at who the Graysons were and how their seemingly normal life started to fall apart. The Grayson family lived what most would call a typical suburban life. Daniel, a dedicated firefighter, had built a strong reputation in the community. His wife, Emily, was a nurse who balanced long hours at the hospital with caring for their two kids, Ellie and Luke. Their lives revolved around school schedules, work shifts, and quiet evenings in their cozy Dayton home. Emily was the glue that held everything together. Despite her demanding job, she made time for family dinners and ensured the kids stayed on track. Ellie, their 13-year-old daughter, loved science and dreamed of becoming an engineer. Her younger brother, Luke, was full of energy, always chasing after a soccer ball or playing video games. To their neighbors, the Graysons seemed like the perfect family. But not everything was as it seemed. While Emily worked tirelessly to keep their household running smoothly, Daniel struggled with the emotional weight of his job. Years of witnessing tragedies had taken a toll on him, leaving him distant and preoccupied. He kept those feelings to himself, trying not to burden Emily, who already had so much on her plate. This gap in their marriage created space for something or someone to creep in. And in March 2012, that someone was Emily's younger sister, Sarah. She arrived unexpectedly, bringing with her a different kind of energy that would soon disrupt everything the Graysons thought they had. Sarah Reed moved in with the Graysons in early 2012 after a difficult divorce. Unlike Emily, who was steady and reliable, Sarah was spontaneous and carefree. She was the type of person who could light up a room with her jokes and charm, and at first her presence seemed like a breath of fresh air. The kids adored her, and she brought a playful energy to the home that helped break up the routine. But beneath her lively personality, Sarah was struggling. She felt overshadowed by Emily's stable life, her strong marriage, successful career, and loving family. Sarah's divorce had left her feeling insecure and out of place. Being in Emily's home only reminded her of what she didn't have. Those feelings of inadequacy and envy began to fester. Daniel, dealing with his own emotional struggles, found Sarah easy to talk to. She was fun, approachable, and seemed to understand him in a way Emily couldn't at the time. Their conversations started casually, often about work or daily life, but they slowly became more personal. Sarah's admiration for Daniel grew, and Daniel, feeling unappreciated at home, began to rely on Sarah's attention. What began as harmless conversations soon crossed a line. And as Sarah grew closer to Daniel, the delicate balance of the Grayson household began to tip in ways no one could foresee. By the time spring turned to summer in 2012, the relationship between Daniel and Sarah had changed. What had started as lighthearted conversations turned into something much deeper. Late-night talks on the porch became routine while Emily worked long shifts at the hospital. These moments, meant to fill the gaps in their lives, began to create a connection they both knew was wrong. Daniel was at a vulnerable point in his life. The weight of his demanding job, combined with the emotional distance growing in his marriage, made Sarah's attention feel like a relief. She listened to stories he had never shared before about the lives he couldn't save and the guilt he carried every day. Sarah, in turn, offered him validation and comfort, something she herself was desperate to find. It wasn't long before the emotional bond they had built turned physical. Both knew it was a line they shouldn't cross, But the excitement of the secret and the temporary escape from their own struggles made it easy to justify. What began as a single moment quickly spiraled into a regular affair, hidden behind the normalcy of family life. But as their secret grew, so did the tension in the house. Sarah, no longer content with quiet moments stolen in the night, started to leave subtle clues. A misplaced earring here, a lingering look there. It was as though she wanted the affair to be discovered. For Daniel, the thrill was quickly replaced by anxiety as he began to realize how close they were to being caught. And though Emily didn't yet have proof, she started noticing things that didn't add up: a scent that wasn't hers, a look that felt too familiar. The cracks in the Grayson family were no longer invisible, and the balance they'd known for so long was on the verge of breaking. By August 2012, the situation had reached a boiling point. Sarah, no longer satisfied with her role as the other woman, began pushing Daniel for more. Late one night, when the house was quiet, she confronted him in the kitchen. Her tone was no longer playful or flirtatious, it was desperate. She wanted him to leave Emily, to walk away from his family, and to be with her instead. Daniel panicked. He tried to calm Sarah down, explaining that he couldn't abandon his wife and children. The argument grew heated, and although no one else in the house heard it, the aftermath was unmistakable. Sarah's frustration turned into anger, and her once flirtatious demeanor became volatile. That night, Daniel made the decision to end the affair. He promised himself he would repair the damage he had caused and focus on his marriage. But for Sarah, it wasn't that simple. Losing Daniel wasn't just about heartbreak, it was a rejection that cut deep into her insecurities. She couldn't let him go, and her obsession with him began to take on a darker, more dangerous edge. It started with small things. Daniel noticed her car following him on his way to work. Anonymous notes began showing up at the firehouse, and though they didn't have her name, the tone was unmistakably hers. The messages ranged from cryptic to threatening, leaving Daniel on edge. At home, Emily noticed a shift in Daniel's behavior. He was distant, distracted, and on edge, traits completely unlike the steady husband she had known. She attributed it to stress from his job, but the reality was much more complicated. Sarah wasn't ready to let go, and her actions were about to escalate in ways no one could ignore. As summer turned to fall in 2012, Sarah's fixation on Daniel became more intense. She wasn't content with simply watching from the shadows. She began actively interfering in his life. Late at night, the Grayson family's phone would ring, only for the calls to end in silence or heavy breathing. Sarah's voice messages, though anonymous, left little doubt about who was behind them. Daniel would delete them immediately, desperate to hide the truth from Emily. But Sarah wasn't stopping there. Her obsession drove her to invade their home when no one was around. On one occasion, Emily returned from a long shift to find small but unsettling changes: the living room rug out of place, a picture frame turned backward, and a faint scent of Sarah's floral perfume lingering in the air. Emily dismissed it as her own exhaustion playing tricks on her, but Sarah's presence in the house was very real. Meanwhile, Sarah's attempts to unnerve Daniel continued to grow. His car was vandalized while parked at the fire station, with bright red paint spelling out, "You can't escape me." Coworkers joked about it being the work of an ex, but Daniel knew better. He scrubbed off the paint in silence, refusing to report it out of fear that his secret would be exposed. By this point, Sarah wasn't just targeting Daniel, she was coming for Emily too. She started sending fake evidence of infidelity directly to Emily's mailbox. Photos, fabricated hotel receipts, and anonymous notes were carefully designed to destroy Emily's trust in her husband. And though Emily couldn't bring herself to confront Daniel, the strain on their marriage grew heavier with each passing day. Sarah's obsession wasn't fading, it was consuming her. The line between her anger and her desperation blurred, and her actions became bolder. What had started as an affair was now a dangerous game, and the Grayson family was caught in the middle of her unraveling. By winter of 2012, Sarah's obsession had spiraled out of control. Her fixation wasn't just about Daniel anymore, it extended to Emily, whom she saw as the obstacle standing between her and the life she believed she deserved. Her actions turned from unsettling to outright dangerous, with each move more calculated and invasive than the last. In December, Sarah's frustration reached new heights. One evening, she followed Emily to the hospital where she worked, watching from the shadows as Emily walked to her car. It wasn't a chance encounter, it was a deliberate attempt to invade Emily's life, leaving no part of her world untouched. For Sarah, it was about control, and she wanted Emily to feel her presence everywhere. At home, Daniel was doing everything he could to shield Emily from what was happening, but it was becoming harder to keep the truth hidden. Sarah's behavior grew more erratic, and the stress was taking its toll. Emily noticed how distracted and on edge Daniel had become, but she couldn't connect the dots. Meanwhile, Sarah escalated her tactics, sending more threats, vandalizing property, and continuing to stalk the family. What neither Daniel nor Emily realized was that Sarah wasn't just trying to scare them, she was planning something much worse. Her obsession had turned into a dangerous determination to dismantle their lives completely. By January 2013, the signs were impossible to ignore, but the Graysons had no idea just how far Sarah was willing to go. A storm was brewing, and it was about to explode in the most devastating way possible. On the night of February 10, 2013, the Grayson household was quiet. Emily had returned home early from her hospital shift, exhausted but relieved to have a rare evening to herself. Ellie was at a friend's house for a sleepover, and Luke had fallen asleep in front of the TV. Daniel was covering an overnight shift at the fire station, leaving Emily alone in the house. Sarah had been watching. She knew the family's routine by heart and had been waiting for the perfect moment. That night, she decided to act. Armed with a knife and a plan, Sarah entered the Grayson home undetected. Her actions weren't impulsive, they were deliberate and calculated, driven by months of obsession and rage. Emily didn't hear her coming. She was sitting in the living room, likely going over patient notes from her shift, when Sarah attacked. The violence was swift and overwhelming. Emily fought back, but Sarah's rage was unstoppable. When it was over, Emily lay lifeless in the same home where she had built her life and raised her children. Before leaving, Sarah left a chilling message for Daniel. Using Emily's blood, she scrawled on the wall above her body, "She didn't deserve you." Then she vanished into the night, leaving behind a crime scene that would haunt the Grayson family forever. When Ellie returned home later that evening, she was met with a horror no teenager should ever have to face. Her screams alerted the neighbors, who called 911. Within minutes, police and paramedics arrived, but it was already too late. Emily Grayson was gone, and the once peaceful home was now a place of unimaginable tragedy. The murder of Emily Grayson sent shockwaves through the quiet Dayton community. News of the brutal attack spread quickly, leaving neighbors stunned and searching for answers. Emily, known for her kindness and dedication as a nurse, was mourned by everyone who knew her. A candlelight vigil was held outside the Grayson home, with friends and neighbors coming together to honor her memory. But as grief enveloped the community, the investigation into her death was just beginning. Detective Laura Hayes, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving even the toughest cases, was assigned to lead the inquiry. From the moment she stepped into the Grayson home, it was clear this was no random crime. The scene told a story of personal rage, a message scrawled in blood, and a victim who seemed to have been targeted specifically. At first, suspicion naturally fell on Daniel. Rumors about tension in his marriage and his distant behavior in recent months painted a picture of a man who might have had something to hide. Friends and neighbors whispered about cracks in the seemingly perfect Grayson family. But Daniel's alibi being on duty at the fire station at the time of the murder was solid, forcing detectives to look elsewhere for answers. As the investigation unfolded, new details began to emerge. Witnesses came forward, mentioning unusual activity near the Grayson home in the weeks leading up to the murder. One neighbor recalled seeing Sarah's car parked on the street several times, often late at night. This, combined with the history Sarah shared with Daniel, shifted the focus of the investigation entirely. It wasn't just about solving a murder anymore, It was about uncovering the tangled web of obsession and betrayal that had led to Emily's death. As detectives dug deeper into the case, the evidence against Sarah Reed began to pile up. Surveillance footage from nearby streets captured her car circling the Grayson home the night of the murder. Phone records revealed a series of anonymous calls and messages sent to the Grayson household in the months before Emily's death, messages that became increasingly threatening over time. A search of Sarah's apartment uncovered even more damning evidence. Hidden in her closet was a journal that detailed her obsession with Daniel and her growing hatred for Emily. Page after page, Sarah described her frustrations, her fantasies, and her plans. Phrases like, "She's standing in my way," and "If Emily were gone, he'd be mine," painted a chilling picture of a woman consumed by jealousy and rage. Forensic analysis tied Sarah directly to the crime. Her fingerprints were found on the knife used in the attack, as well as on various surfaces inside the Grayson home. DNA evidence further linked her to the scene, removing any doubt about her involvement. Detectives also uncovered evidence of Sarah's stalking photos of the Grayson family, fabricated hotel receipts meant to frame Daniel, and records of her online searches about Emily's work schedule. By February 15, 2013, investigators were ready to act. Sarah was arrested at her apartment, visibly shaken but maintaining her innocence. The news of her arrest shocked the Dayton community. Sarah, who had once been a trusted family member, was now exposed as the person behind the horrifying events that had torn the Grayson family apart. With her in custody, the stage was set for one of the most gripping trials the community had ever seen. The trial of Sarah Reed began on May 1, 2013, drawing intense media attention. Dubbed "the Sister in Shadows" by the press, Sarah's story of betrayal and violence captured the nation's fascination. The courtroom was packed with journalists, spectators, and grieving members of the Grayson family, all waiting to hear how the case would unfold. The prosecution wasted no time presenting a detailed and devastating case. They painted Sarah as a woman consumed by envy and rejection, whose obsession with Daniel drove her to methodically dismantle Emily's life. Prosecutors introduced her journal as key evidence, reading aloud the most incriminating entries to the jury. Every word revealed the depth of Sarah's hatred and her deliberate planning of the murder. Surveillance footage and forensic evidence further solidified Sarah's guilt. Video showed her car near the Grayson home on the night of the murder. Fingerprints, DNA, and the knife used in the attack left little room for doubt. Witnesses, including neighbors and former co-workers, testified about Sarah's erratic behavior and her obsession with Daniel. Every piece of evidence pointed to her as the mastermind behind Emily's death. The defense, led by Sarah's attorney, argued that she was mentally ill and incapable of making rational decisions. They portrayed her as a fragile woman overwhelmed by heartbreak, claiming that the journal entries were not plans but the ramblings of someone unwell. Despite these efforts, the evidence presented by the prosecution was overwhelming. Throughout the trial, the emotional toll on the Grayson family was evident. Daniel sat silently, often holding Ellie's hand as she struggled to process the details of her mother's murder. Luke, too young to understand the full gravity of the situation, was shielded from the proceedings. The trial wasn't just about justice for Emily, it was also about the immense loss the family was now left to endure. After weeks of testimony and evidence, the case was nearing its conclusion. All eyes were on the jury as they prepared to decide the fate of the woman who had destroyed so many lives. On June 20, 2013, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Sarah Reed was found guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom was silent as the decision was read aloud. Daniel Grayson sat motionless, his face reflecting a mix of grief and exhaustion. His daughter, Ellie, seated beside him, clung to his arm, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, on the other hand, showed no visible reaction. Her once confident demeanor was now replaced with a pale, hollow expression. The sentencing hearing took place on July 2, 2013. The judge, delivering a firm yet somber statement, described Sarah's crime as a selfish and calculated act born out of obsession. Sarah was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring she would never walk free again. For the Grayson family and the community, it brought a sense of closure, though the scars from the tragedy would remain forever. Outside the courthouse, the community expressed a mix of relief and sadness. Emily was remembered as a kind-hearted nurse, a devoted mother, and a person who had touched countless lives. Friends and neighbors mourned her loss, but hoped the verdict would allow the family to begin healing. For Daniel, Ellie, and Luke, life would never be the same. Daniel resigned from his position at the fire department, unable to continue the life he once knew. He decided to move away with his children, seeking a fresh start far from the haunting memories of their Dayton home. The Grayson house, once filled with laughter and family moments, was left behind as a painful reminder of everything they had lost. The trial marked the end of Sarah's story, but the lessons from her actions lingered. It served as a chilling reminder of how unchecked jealousy and obsession can spiral into unimaginable tragedy. For the Grayson family, rebuilding their lives was a slow and painful process, but they remained a symbol of resilience in the face of overwhelming loss. The aftermath of the trial left a deep mark on everyone involved. For the Grayson family, moving forward was a struggle filled with unanswered questions and heavy emotions. Daniel, burdened by guilt over the choices that led to this tragedy, focused on providing a stable life for Ellie and Luke. He knew he could never undo the damage, but his priority became helping his children rebuild their lives. Ellie, now 14, carried the weight of her mother's loss heavily. Once a bright and curious teenager, she found herself grappling with grief and confusion over the events that tore her family apart. Luke, still too young to fully understand the tragedy, asked questions that Daniel struggled to answer. Together, they began attending therapy, seeking a way to cope with their new reality. The broader community in Dayton also felt the shockwaves of the murder and trial. Friends, neighbors, and co-workers of Emily Grayson found it difficult to reconcile the loving nurse they knew with the horrifying circumstances of her death. Memorials were held in her honor, and the hospital where she worked created a scholarship in her name to support aspiring nurses. Sarah Reed's actions and trial became a cautionary tale in the community. Her descent into obsession and violence highlighted how unchecked emotions and unresolved issues can have devastating consequences. People talked about her story not just as a crime, but as a warning of the destructive power of envy and unchecked impulses. For the Graysons, the road ahead was long and uncertain. They moved far from Dayton, seeking a fresh start where they could leave behind the painful memories. Despite the darkness of their loss, Daniel clung to the hope that time and love could help his family heal. Their story, though filled with sorrow, became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, even in the face of unimaginable heartbreak. The Grayson family's story didn't just end with the trial and the move. It became a somber example of how fragile trust and relationships can be when cracks are left unaddressed. People who had once looked up to Daniel as a hero began to view him through a different lens. While he wasn't legally at fault for Emily's death, many couldn't ignore the role his choices played in setting off the events that led to the tragedy. For Daniel, living with that reality was a punishment in itself. Emily's absence was deeply felt not only by her family, but also by her colleagues and the patients she had cared for. At the hospital, her co-workers spoke often of her kindness and tireless dedication. Many patients remembered her as the nurse who had gone out of her way to comfort them during their toughest moments. Her loss wasn't just personal, it was a loss to the entire community. In the years that followed, the Grayson family slowly began to rebuild their lives. Daniel, once a man defined by his work as a firefighter, now worked a quieter job far removed from his old life. He poured his energy into raising Ellie and Luke, making their well-being his top priority. While it wasn't easy, he was determined to give them a sense of stability in a world that had been turned upside down. Ellie found solace in her studies, channeling her grief into her dream of becoming an engineer, just as her mother had always encouraged. Luke, still young and full of energy, began to thrive in his new environment. though he occasionally asked questions about his mom that were difficult to answer. For the Graysons, healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about finding a way to move forward while carrying the memory of Emily with them. The story of Emily Grayson and the tragedy that befell her family became a lasting reminder of the importance of honesty, communication, and seeking help when cracks begin to form in relationships. Though the Graysons were forever changed, their story also showed that even in the face of immense loss, there is a path to hope and renewal. The tragic events surrounding the Grayson family left an undeniable mark on the Dayton community, sparking conversations about the hidden struggles families face. People began to reflect on how seemingly perfect lives could mask deep emotional fractures. Emily's murder became a case study for local organizations advocating for mental health awareness, encouraging open discussions about emotional struggles and the importance of seeking help before conflicts spiral out of control. The case also highlighted the devastating consequences of unchecked obsession. Experts in psychology and criminal behavior use Sarah Reed's actions to emphasize how envy and resentment, if left unaddressed, can lead to catastrophic outcomes. Workshops and seminars were organized in the community to educate people on recognizing early signs of dangerous behavior in themselves or others. For law enforcement, the case became a reminder of how domestic conflicts can escalate into violent crimes. The Dayton Police Department implemented training programs for officers to better recognize and respond to signs of stalking, harassment, and obsessive behavior. Detectives involved in the investigation spoke publicly about the importance of taking subtle warnings seriously, whether it's a series of anonymous messages or unexplained tension in a household. Beyond the immediate community, Emily's story resonated nationally. True crime shows and news outlets covered the case extensively, delving into the human emotions behind the headlines. While some saw it as just another tragic tale, others viewed it as a lesson in understanding how small actions and choices can snowball into life-altering consequences. For the Graysons, life continued quietly in their new town, away from the spotlight. Daniel focused on protecting his children from the lingering media attention, while Ellie and Luke worked on creating new memories to help overshadow the pain of their past. While the scars remained, they learned to live with them, carrying Emily's memory as both a source of strength and a reminder of the cost of unspoken struggles.